Hello, hello. I'm your host, Lera Kooper. You're listening to The Accelerator. The pun is intended, but it's not that creative. My name is just in the middle of it. And true to its word, we're helping you view your business like an investor, to work on it rather than in it so you get the most out of your life's investment. And today we have a very special guest. We have Matt Hansen. He's an EOS implementer, and I'll let him explain what that means. But our topic is going through the 5 most common frustrations that business owners face. Running a business is no small feat. We know this, and it comes with a unique set of challenges. And so today we'll be addressing those and we'll be exploring the practical strategies to turn these frustrations into opportunities for growth and success. So thank you for joining, Matt.
Thank you, Lara. I appreciate it. It's great to
Yeah.
be here with you today.
Great to have you. And before we dive into, the weeds of this, the most common frustrations, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why this is something that you spend your time on?
It, yeah, it's great to be here with you, Lara. I appreciate it. Yeah, a little bit about myself. So I'm an engineer by training. Early on in my career, I had a number of patents, and one of those patents launched a new business unit at the company I was at. So a couple founders and myself, partners, we built that business to about $10 million a year. It took about 3 years or so to do that, and from there, I just kept climbing the corporate ladder. Just kept doing that sort of thing, and eventually, I was responsible for a couple $100 million a year in sales. But I found that I really missed that entrepreneurial spirit I had when I was younger. So I left the corporate world and I went to run a small business. It was about 55 people. I was the general manager for the owner. And so, I worked hard to try and understand what the owner's vision was and how to make that all happen. And it was a bit of a challenge, as all small businesses are. And the transition from a big business to a little business was different. And, I worked with them to implement an ERP system and reorganize a factory and all sorts of things. But a lot of the approaches I learned in a bigger business, they didn't apply well to a small business. And that's when I started to learn about EOS, and the beauty of it and how it works for small businesses and medium-sized businesses to really help those leaders. And so there, through that experience, that's when I decided, you know what, I want to help as many business leaders and owners and their leadership teams as I can to really help them get everything that they want out of the business. And so I switched, and that's what I do now.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And that's a fascinating story too, to really go from this high of running this multi-million-dollar business, obviously part of your own success that you were able to manage it and begin the division with your patents.
Hmm.
And then now coming back to the other end of it and taking it to the smaller businesses and saying, here's what I learned and here's how I can help you.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. I can't wait to dig further into it. And before we'll keep teasing out the 5 frustrations, but
Yeah.
before we dig into those, I'd love to ask you, throughout that process, what's the best or worst advice that you've received?
Well, I think, some of the best advice was almost more of a mindset getting from my parents. There's a little placard over my shoulder and it says, "It can be done." And when I took my first job out of grad school, my mom gave me that all those years ago. And it's been on my desk or near my desks ever since. And I'm a big believer in that optimism, right? It can be done. It just takes work, a little bit of luck, being open minded, and it's guided me a lot. So that was probably the best advice that I've ever received. Worst advice, I rack my brain and I think I have like some amnesia, like those bad experiences, bad advice. I just sort of like, put it behind me, so I can't really remember. I know I've had bad advice because I've definitely made some bad decisions, uh, but I can't seem to remember any. I think I've blocked those out.
That's funny. Well, that is excellent advice. I'm a big believer in that. I think it's Henry Ford, where it's whether you think you can or can't, you're right. Essentially, it's whatever
Yeah,
you put your mind to. As
yeah,
long as you don't quit, chances are you're going to hit it or get close to it. So I agree with that.
yeah.
And then on the worst advice, I think that's a mark of a true entrepreneur, because I was asked this same question on an interview a few months back.
Hmm.
And I called my mom, I called my husband, I called my dad. I said, "What's the worst advice I've ever received? Like, I can't think of anything." And
Yeah.
my mom's giving me some ideas, and I'm thinking, like, I think I just don't remember it because if it was bad at the time, I didn't listen to it. So yeah, that seems to track.
Yeah.
Um, okay, well, we won't keep people waiting. We'll dive straight into it. So, the first frustration that you had listed was that the business runs you, not the other way around. And that's one of the most common complaints.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, when you're a brand new entrepreneur, you start up your business and it's little. Maybe it's just you, maybe you and a partner or two, and that owner, right? You know how to do everything. You're the best at it. You figured it out. It all makes sense. But then you're successful and the
Mhm.
business grows, right? And the reason people feel that, discomfort, that unsettling feeling of I don't have control. I don't know what everything's going. It's because you've been successful and the business has grown. But
Mhm.
what the challenge can be is that the owners haven't then put in a place, a system, a structure into the business to help them understand what's happening when it becomes too big for them to know every little detail, right? so
Mhm.
so at some point you've got to have that system. You've got to be able to delegate to people that you trust. You have to have ways of telling people how to do things, and that's a huge step for, well, any entrepreneur, any business leader, is to feel comfortable with how you delegate to people and
Mhm.
put systems in place so that you know what's going on. That's ultimately kind of what causes that feeling of loss of control.
You
Um,
make it sound so easy to fix.
it's simple, but it's not easy. That's
Yeah.
for sure. That's
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
No, that's typically how it is. And I think that's something a lot of business owners fail to realize is that what got you successful is
Yeah.
not what's going to keep you successful or to keep
Right.
your business growing. And so first you have to determine, am I content here or do I want to scale? And
Yeah.
if that is something you want,
Yeah.
then what do they do? Because now they need a whole new set of skills.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things is you've got to drive transparency across the entire business, right? You've got to have a way of teasing out all that data. And a really simple approach um, is just a scorecard. When
Mhm.
you have a scorecard for every team, every department, and just have those numbers and have them available, and make sure it's a good scorecard, right? It's got to be
Mhm.
something that really tells you the absolute pulse of whatever's happening in that group, that department, that team. Ideally they're metrics or indicators that are leading indicators. They're predicting what's going to happen in that business, not what's actually happened, right? Everybody likes to talk about like sales or revenue, important number, but that's after everything's happened. So, what are
Mhm.
those indicators that predict what's going to happen in the future? And it's a really simple tool, and an important one. And if you got the right numbers, it tells you a lot.
Yeah. No, that is a great thing to know is leading indicators because sales and revenue are just a result
Hmm.
of a lot of effort in advance. Same thing goes with utilization and productivity.
Yeah,
So if they decide, the business is running me, but
yeah,
I do want to scale and I want to grow,
yeah.
where do they even begin? Because likely there's 30 things they can think of that need to be done.
Yeah, well, that's actually really core. Is one of the things that we talk about in EOS is we talk about doing less better, right? Focus on 3 or 5 or 7 things, right? Not 23, 35, 47 different things.
Mhm.
Find those things that are really core, really important, and do those really, really well, right? There's that old saying, right? Don't spread the peanut butter too thin. And that's true. If you spread it too thin, you get nothing done, or it's all kind of not so good. So
Yeah.
focus on doing it really, really well, nail it, be awesome at it, um, and then move on to the next thing. And it's a hard thing to learn, that focus, but it's really
Mhm.
important.
It is hard. I think especially as an entrepreneur, or at least speaking for myself, you're relatively comfortable with change. And so it's easy to try something a little bit and want to move on, try something else, try something else. But that focus is so critical to actually getting lasting traction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. Another thing is also when you're new, right? You do everything, and then you hire somebody to do it.
Hmm.
Um, but the one thing that people aren't so good at, right? It's not a very fun thing for many people. But like you got a process, write it down, just
Hmm.
document it, and then when you hire a person, train them how to do it,
Hmm.
and then you can feel better about that. That's another thing that's really important.
Yeah, it seems like more of that is, like you said, it's more of the mindset that's the problem in moving forward rather than just those simple action items.
It's terrifying, and it's sort of terrifying, like as an owner, as a leader of a business, to then have to delegate work away.
Hmm.
It's a huge act of trust,
It
a
is.
leap of faith, but it's important.
Yeah, no, it is important. And we'll talk a little bit more about people, which is a
Yeah.
common frustration later in the episode, but that's it's critical to
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
So frustration number two, you had mentioned revenue,
Yes.
and often that's just not having enough cash.
Right.
And a common misunderstanding that at least I see in the tax accounting, financial advisory world is many business owners see their net income on the P&L, and then they look at their bank balance and say, what happened? This isn't the same.
Yeah.
And cash flow is the lifeblood of any
Yeah.
business. So it's critical that we put some focus here.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. It's I think one of the things it starts from is again that transparency. A lot of
Mhm.
times the business owner, and it's an understandable feeling, but they're nervous about sharing how much money that company's making or not making, right?
Mhm.
Because it's their money, right? They feel like people are going to know and judge me based on how much I'm making or maybe not making, right? They think I'm
Mhm.
successful and we're struggling or whatever it is. And that's natural, but it's important with it at a minimum the leadership team is to really have a financial review with that team, monthly, no more than quarterly,
Mhm.
because if that team really knows what the situation is, 99.9% of people are going to act in your best interest because they want you to be successful. They want to be successful. And I think that's a big important step. And I think a lot of small business owners don't do that enough.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And so, for example, within our own firm, something that we've done if we had a loss in, if we weren't meeting our utilization goals for a department,
Hmm.
rather than just saying we're off by 5%,
Yeah.
we would say that 5%, if it was utilized, here's the dollars
Oh, yeah.
that would have gone straight to the bottom line. And
Yeah.
so when you give your leaders this number in dollars, all of a sudden it's very real. What am I losing the company? Or where can my team improve? Or if they're doing well, then it's yes, I'm contributing so much more to the company.
Mhm.
And if you have a relatively healthy leadership style, you want to share that with others. And so that's of course where comp plans and all those things come into play. But yeah, keeping that bottom line healthy is critical.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
It's interesting you touched on if you've got a strong leadership team, and I think that comes from being open and honest, right? You get a strong leadership team when people are open and honest and they trust each other. And the other thing that's a really good sign of is, you've got people that are accountable, right?
Mhm.
Accountable people aren't afraid of being measured, right? Because they see it as an opportunity to show, like, look how great I'm doing, right?
Mhm.
I'm hitting my numbers, I'm beating my numbers, whatever that might be. They love that. If you've got people that are trying to like hide and they don't like that, chances are they're they're scared of being held
There's
accountable.
something to hide potentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's important.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think just clarity and expectations is such a gift with teams because people naturally, I think we want to know, am I doing well or do I have improvement to make? And without that bar being set, how will they
yeah.
ever know? How do you go into even a review
Yeah.
and come out of it with a productive plan if you don't have these things set.
I, you know, everything ultimately comes back to people, and we'll talk about
It's
that.
true, and that's our next frustration.
It
Yeah,
comes back
it's
to people.
I mean, from recruitment to retention, that's people management is often
Yeah,
the toughest part.
yeah. I think to talk about. There's so many things about cash management and profit and everything else. And you're such an expert in the area, but yeah, like it's watching your pennies. I think another thing is pricing. There's so
Mhm.
many companies that are afraid of charging what their products are really worth.
It's true.
They feel for whatever they feel guilty, they feel bad, whatever it is. Um, but I think if the market can bear it, look at your market price. And it's okay
Mhm.
to charge that, right? It doesn't mean you don't have to really be exorbitant, but charge a fair price, and it's okay. You
Mhm.
deserve it, right? You do hard work. It's okay.
Yeah. And I would say even again with our own industry because it's the one that I know best, it's easy to say double the prices, lose half the clients and all is well. You net out, but what people don't think about when they hear that is okay, what's the pushback going to be from the team about losing legacy clients or from legacy clients
Mhm.
about they're changing or they're growing or this and that. And at the end of the day, as an owner, it's your decision that I have my 10% of favorite clients that we're just going to keep them because we've been working with them for 20 years.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're going to bed thinking about our clients, but it's probably not true the other way around. And so we have to make sure that our bottom line is healthy. We have to make
Mhm.
sure that the team that works hard for us are well
Yeah.
compensated.
Yeah.
And if we're running at this high volume transactional, um, in this high volume transactional business model,
Mhm.
you're just asking for burnout. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not moving you closer to your goal strategically.
Yeah. You just reminded me of a story of a client I was working with, where one of their top five customers, longtime customer, right? Top five, lots of sales, um, but the 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 business was losing money. Not the whole business, but that particular client
Mm-hmm.
was was a negative margin business, and a contract came up for renegotiation. And what happened is they looked at that and said, "Wait, this we can't continue this. It doesn't matter that they're top five." And
Mm-hmm.
so there is a renegotiation and a hard conversation with the client about or the customer about um, we can't do this. And so it was hard, right? The customer was unhappy, but
Of course.
ultimately the
They're
decision.
getting a great deal.
And but the client realized you can't continue to do this. And so it was we they'd be better off, right? They'd be more profitable if the business went away. And so they made the decision, like, if we're going to keep the business, we have to adjust the prices.
Hmm.
Ultimately, it was a successful negotiation. The prices were adjusted, right? So it became a profitable customer. But it's a leap of faith, but sometimes you have to look at it that way. Sometimes you're better not having business.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point.
Mhm.
And it goes back to your first one, which is about visibility.
Yeah,
And they would not have been able to identify that they were losing money on that client if they didn't have good financials, if they
true.
didn't have visibility over the
Yeah,
cash. And
yeah,
so that's a critical assessment to do.
yeah,
I mean, I'd say at least annually on your
yeah,
clients.
yeah, yeah. You got to do the homework. It's
Yeah.
hard, but you got to do the homework.
Yeah, it's true. Especially with new work that you're bringing in, something that we do is we put in our engagement letters, we here's your proposal, here's your fees, but we're going to take another look at this in 90 days after we've worked with you to make
Mhm.
sure that we scope this out correctly. Because
Yeah,
when you're going into an engagement, oftentimes it's just an educated guess.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great that you take that approach. I think it's also a
And
good trust builder.
yeah, and we want to be transparent with our clients of, I can't read your mind. I can't see your operations today. But in
Yeah,
90 days, we can have another conversation and talk about what support you need, if it's more, if it's less,
yeah,
and what that looks like.
yeah.
Mhm.
How much of how important do you think, or how much time? or lack of time do people put into really analyzing their cash flow
Hmm.
and looking for leaks? Because I'm sure there are all sorts of leaks within cash flow, and people just don't spend a lot of time. Those little things add up. Is that your
Yeah, I would say the majority of businesses that we've worked with, at least when they started working with us, their bank balance was their gut check, and that was the extent of the cash flow planning.
mm,
Um, that's pretty common
yeah,
because you're busy as a business owner. You're just trying to keep things afloat. You're
yeah,
wearing 15 plus hats,
mhm,
and if there's cash in the bank, then you just keep putting that on the back burner.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
Has that
And
been your experience working with clients?
yeah, yeah, it's common, right? When things are going well, people don't think about it, right? You just spend, well, we see it in our personal lives too, right?
Mhm.
Things are going well, you spend a little more money on things that maybe you don't really need, and then it's really hard to tighten the belt, right? There's that old
Mhm.
saying, when things are going well, that's when it's most critical to prepare for the future,
I agree.
and
Yeah.
really watch the bottom line.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, going into people,
Yes.
we've talked so much about having the right team, having good leadership,
Yeah, yeah,
and I bookended it by saying from recruitment to retention,
yeah,
this is always a struggle for
yeah,
business owners because we can never expect our team
yeah,
to be as dedicated to the business as we are. It's not their
yeah,
business. And
yeah,
so, how do you get initiative out of them without being an owner or having those expectations?
yeah.
Where do you even begin?
Well, yeah. So people problems are the most common problems, and where I come from, or my perspective where I come from, is that like I said, 99.9% of people want to go to work. They want to do a good job. They want to be recognized as doing a good job, right? People want to do a good job. But when we think about it from a management perspective, so often the managers are blaming the people for doing a bad job. And some of the ways to think about that is, well, is it the employee's fault, or is it how management is managing the business's fault?
Hmm.
And I think often if we flip that mirror, or, look in that mirror, right, we're not good at setting a clear intent, right? We've talked about that. We're not good at setting expectations. We don't really tell people what we want of them. We just assume they know what's in our head.
Hmm.
Or we tell them once during an interview and then we never tell them again, right? We have to repeat over and over again. The other thing is, when you're a small business, maybe you've got some people, a friend was working for you or a family member or something, and you get to a certain size, but what the company needs going forward is different. But we've
Hmm.
got these people that we're tied to, we love them for whatever reason. Um, and we also, right, regardless of the business's size, we don't provide frequent, clear feedback on how people are doing, right? How many times have people not gotten a performance review at all during their annual, right, when they get a raise or whenever? Or if they do, right, the manager spends as little time as possible to just get the paperwork done and moved on.
Yep.
It's not fair to the people. And so, one of the starting points is we have to set clear expectations, right? We have to really think about it. And one of the things that we do, and when I work with people, is we work a lot with the leadership team to create something we call an accountability chart. And so everybody's heard of an org chart.
Hmm.
An org chart, right? That's just who reports to who. But an accountability chart, you can think of it as an org chart on steroids. So it's got who is sitting in what seat. What is their function? Are they a sales function or a accounting function or whatever kind of function? But it also talks about what are the roles that they have. What are the top 5 roles? What are they supposed to do? What do we expect of them? And so when we use that accountability chart, it becomes really, really clear what everybody's responsible for, what their roles really are. And that's a super important tool. And when we do that, we also think about the business into the future. So that's one of the things that we start with. And it's really working with that team for them to start to understand is, oh, we don't have the right organization. You know, the other thing that we talk about is getting the right people in the business. So,
Mhm.
how do you determine the right people? Well, one of the things is you talked about, right? We talk about somebody's got to get what the job is, they got to want to do it, and then they have to have the skills, the background, the capacity to do it. You just
Mhm.
have to. If they don't have those things, they're the wrong person for the job. But the other thing is we talk about is we spend a lot of time working with companies to understand their core values. What is the culture of that business? What actually is it? Not what do they want it to be, but what is it? And you need to make sure that you're hiring people that fit those core values, right? Because those people are people you love. You love going to work with them. They're the people you wish you had 100 of them because if you did, you'd remake your industry.
Yeah,
And
they're your
so
superstars.
they are 100%. And so you spend time making sure you hire people from the get go that as a management team, you're clear who the right people are so that when you go to hire somebody, you hire that right person. And then you make
Mhm.
sure you've got the right seats for them to
Yeah.
sit in.
It's
So
funny that you
that's a
say
big
that, or that you use that term, sitting in the right seats, because as you know, as we've grown, we've had enough people on deck internally to not need to hire, up to this point at least. But it was always the question of, is everyone in the right seat? We believe they fit in with the core values, and we adore them. But is this the right position? Are they accountable to the right things? Even when we brought in 11 new team members with our merger back in December, it was, okay, is everyone in the right seats now that we're looking at this team plus this team?
yeah,
And making sure that everyone was
yeah,
just really means everyone's happy with what we're doing or what they're doing,
yeah,
but they're also taking more initiative and they're accountable and they care about their job and the results of it because
yeah,
they enjoy it. And
yeah.
so yeah, it's interesting that you point that out.
It's we talk a lot about we use the term in EOS, right people, right seats. You got to have them
Mhm.
both, right? And so that right person is the person you love, right? You want to be surrounded by them, and the right seat is they're going to be a rock star, productive person.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a nightmare when if you've got the right person, but they're in the wrong seat. Like it's a nightmare because you love them, but they're not good at the job. So hopefully you can
Mhm.
find the job they're good at.
Yeah,
But
it's a disservice to, I mean, the company, but it's a disservice to them as well because they could be incredible in a different seat, but they're left feeling like they're underperforming.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're uncomfortable. Everybody's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about it. That's why you got to
Yeah.
give the feedback. But you got to be open with them, and chances are they know that they're not in the right seat.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully you can find one.
Do you
I'm
have,
a big. Mhm, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to say, do you have any tips for determining during the interview stage if someone is the right fit? Because you only get so much interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we do is we talk and I work with clients about something that we call the speech. And
Mhm.
so when we work and we define those core values, we work with the leadership team, the owner usually, or the visionary of the company who creates a speech. And during that speech, they talk about what are the core values and provide examples or analogies or things like that to explain how those core values work or applied within the business. And so then what we do is they'll use those speeches in a variety of situations. One of them, and I did this back when I was running company, is when I would be interviewing somebody, I'd trot out the core values. I'd say, hey, here they are. And what we find is during the hiring process, there'll be people to say, I like those core values. Like I want to work there.
Mhm.
But then also it'll be used because somebody will say that, I don't know if I like that. And they'll be repelled from that core value. So they'll self-select out of it. Right.
That's
And then
helpful.
you can talk. And so I found it hugely successful in trying to make sure you get people, the right people that match your core values during the hiring process. When you do that, um,
Mhm.
it's a really important step, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great step.
Yeah,
And requires, again, that transparency over what are our core values and
yeah,
does our whole team know it? Because the
yeah.
owner might not be the one interviewing either.
No. And that's why you got to say it over and over, right? During company meetings, you've got to trot out examples. You've got to, right? You got to tell people over and over and over again until they finally sinks in. You can't put a poster on a wall and just expect everybody to magically know them, right? You got to
Mhm.
tell them over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Before we move into our fourth point, do you have any
Mhm.
extra final tips on people problems?
Oh man, uh, I think the biggest thing is you just got to be clear with people. You've got to
Yeah,
give them feedback. It's it can be very uncomfortable as a manager to give people, everybody loves to get good feedback, right? That's
right.
fun. But it's hard to give people feedback where we're telling them where they need to improve or they're falling short.
Mhm.
And that's a challenge, but it's possible. And actually, there you just reminded me of a story of a client I was talking with. And before he started working with EOS, he had told me about how he felt hostage to his employees. And this is super common with many businesses, especially smaller businesses, is people would complain and he would be worried about losing them. And so he would promote them, he'd give them a raise, he'd mollify them in some way, right? And
Enable it.
it just, yeah, and it would just dig that hole deeper. And once he worked on defining his core values, he got a lot more clear and more confident in what he needed as an owner in that business. And so when he was telling me the story, he'd been, a year and a half into his journey, and he had mentioned he'd made some changes to some how he compensates people, just moving dollars around, not really changing how much. And
Mhm.
um, and he had some employees that were complaining, like, "Oh, I can go to work for this company, and they'll, pay me more like what I want." And what he said is he had a conversation with those people in the moment to say, look, here's my core values. These are the company's core values. And these are core values that you're not meeting anymore. So, what I want you to do is spend the next week, think about that. We're going to have another conversation. If you
Mhm.
still don't want to meet these core values, then you can go someplace else. And I found that story so inspiring that you took somebody who was so worried about losing people because they thought the company would fold, to a year and a half later being so confident in what were the right people for his business, that it completely changed his approach. And I think that's a big part of it. You just got to be clear with what you want and be comfortable, learn to become comfortable sharing that with employees.
Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that story because as business owners, you often feel alone. You're the only one in the business. Everyone
Yeah,
else is an employee or subordinate somehow, and
yeah,
it's it's great to hear these other stories of those that have gone through it, the risks that they've taken, even if it's an emotional risk,
mhm,
and how it turned out for them. And I feel like we can almost copy the format of our first problem of the business runs you, not the other way around, to the people run you, not the other way around,
exactly.
and that is a problem.
It is a problem.
Yeah. So say we have, we've scaled well, we've
Yeah,
delegated, we've done everything well, but now frustration number four, we've
yeah,
plateaued, we've hit the ceiling.
yeah,
Eventually all businesses reach this point
yeah,
where you kind of stagnate.
yeah,
And so what do you do when hitting the next level seems impossible?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like you said, every business will eventually hit a ceiling. It's just how good you are at predicting when you might hit that ceiling.
Mm,
So yeah, you mentioned delegation. That's a really important thing. Predicting, and we talked about the accountability chart, right? That's a great way to help you identify coming holes, how to fill those things.
mhm,
The other thing is simplifying, right? As people are added, just everything becomes more complex. And if you're not careful, the bureaucracy and the administration and all those things will just completely choke off a business.
mhm,
And so you got to work at just always simplifying. What are the core pieces? Focus on that. The rest is noise. Get rid of it. Get rid of the complications, and focus on simplifying. Um, we talked also a little bit earlier about process, right? Systemize the business, get those core things that you need to do over and over and over again, and make sure that you've documented that process, you've simplified it, and then you're making sure and managing and measuring everybody to make sure that everybody that does that process, it's really followed by all of them. And that's a big part of it. So you just got to get good at mastering those things. Another thing that can start to choke businesses off when they hit a ceiling is, every business has issues.
Mhm.
And I don't know if your experience, this is my personal experience, and with all leadership teams, as well as when I was a manager, is like, as managers, we love to get in a room and we love to talk about problems. Like, we love it, right? And it's so fun. We just talk about problems.
It's a
But
safe, it's a cone of silence. It's a safe space to vent.
but you talk about the problem. But the problem is, all we do is talk about the problem.
Hmm.
A lot of management teams don't really actually solve it, or worse, they take action, but they don't figure out what the actual root problem is, and they don't
Hmm.
solve it at the root. So they do a thing to kind of make it go away today, and then next week it comes back. So when I work with clients, one of the things that we do is, we have a process we call IDS, which stands for identify, discuss, and solve. And so we teach leadership teams, you first have to identify the issue at its root, dig down, figure out what really the root cause is, that fundamental issue, and then discuss it enough to really understand it. And then move on, consciously make the decision to move on and solve it. Come up with a plan of action, make somebody be accountable for it, write down whatever the follow up to dos are, and then go solve it, make it go away forever. Because if you do that over time, every problem you solve just helps build some momentum, keeps better, and that'll also help too.
Yeah, no, the secret sauce is definitely in the execution because there will always be a new problem to talk about. They'll
Yes.
Once you've solved three more, you'll hit three more. You'll have another ceiling. You'll have another ceiling,
Yeah.
and so it helps to get perspectives. If you have several departments, get several departments' perspective on the problem.
Right.
The leaders, the managers, because it's interesting what everyone brings to the table. Each angle that they see it from, and then you have to root out that weed. Otherwise, it's just going to keep coming back.
It will keep coming back. Yeah. Problems never go away. It's how we
It's true.
respond to them.
Just a new problem. But that's the fun of it. That's why we became business owners. Is typically we're problem solvers,
Yeah.
um, and it's fun if you have a good process for it. But if you don't, then you end up addressing the same problem over and over, like you said. If you're not getting to
Yeah.
the root of it, and then it's just then it becomes a frustration.
Yeah. Right. Everybody talks about how somebody's a great firefighter in a business. And everybody talks about how to be a fire preventer, right? You don't want to
Hmm.
have the fire, but fighting fires can become addictive, honestly, right?
Hmm.
Um, Being the person that's the go-to fight the fire. But yeah, you got to predict when the fires are going to happen, make sure they never actually occur, um,
Hmm.
and get things
Yeah,
going.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So say business owners tried everything. They've
Yep.
read all the books,
Yep.
they've attended the seminars,
Yeah.
and nothing's working. This is
Yep.
our last frustration, and
Yeah.
hopefully one that business owners work through instead of quitting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a chunk. So, right. When people say, like, I've listened to all the podcasts, I've read all the books, I've gone to all the seminars, nothing's worked. Well, the thing is that, like, all those books, they tell, what you're supposed to do. And they tell you why it's such a great idea, but the books don't really tell you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, when you've got so many times, entrepreneurs, they're visionaries, right? They got this vision for this awesome thing they want to go do. And by their fundamental nature is they're super creative, big idea people, right? You probably go into all meetings with your team. You got a bunch of different ideas, but the thing is, those visionaries, right? They're trying to do too much. They don't often have somebody that's keeping them on task, right? Keeping them focused. They're impatient. Like let's do it.
Hmm.
Um, and and they're not being held accountable to have the patience and the discipline to make things stick. You know,
I feel like this is a one-on-one. You're talking straight to me.
no judgment. No, but that's what's so common, right? And so you see a problem and like, oh, I got an idea. Let's throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. And you know, so what I do with EOS is the how,
Hmm.
right? We've taken all the great ideas, we've created a structure, and it's how, and it's a proven structured approach. And the thing is, it takes time. So we usually talk to clients and say it takes on average 2 years. It can go faster, it can go slower. It really depends on the organization. But at the heart of it, it's a change, a fundamental structured approach to transform your business so that you get a better business and you ultimately can lead a better life from it. And that just takes time and it takes focus, and you can't rush it. You can't read a book and then have everybody on the leadership team read the book and then assume that everybody's going to change how they manage the business. Nope. You got to take time. You have to have a structured, spaced learning process to go do that. And so that's a lot of the things that when people complain about nothing's working, is they're just trying different things, throwing them at the wall.
Yeah.
Didn't work last month, let's try a new one. And so that's where you got to take your time, have discipline, have people to hold you accountable to getting things done.
Mhm.
And that's the difference there.
Yeah. No, I that's a really great point. I think being a business owner has, well, and building a house, but both have taught me more patience in a few years than in a
Yeah,
lifetime.
yeah,
And so it's true. You really need to focus on your master objective.
yeah,
We call it the mob in our leadership group, and just wait for things to get traction. That's the hardest thing, is because you're not getting that affirmation of, 1 month I tried this thing, nothing's panned out yet. Sometimes it
yeah,
just takes time for those seeds to grow, and you have to be consistent.
yeah.
So that's a
Yeah.
very, very pointed advice, but very good advice.
We say we talk about traction before vision, right? Because so when people work on the business, a lot of times they love to talk about vision, right?
Mhm.
All the big blue sky things. It's fun, right? It's fun to think about what could happen. But where we start is we start with that traction, that execution, the discipline, the accountability. Because when you think about, if you try to execute on a vision but you have no traction, there's kind of a, I guess, a metaphor for it. So when you've got vision without traction, the problem that happens is you're a rudderless boat. That's what's really happening. You know where you want to go, but you have nothing really keeping you on task to achieving that vision. And that's the problem, is
Mhm.
that you need to have something holding you accountable to going out and achieving it. Um, the same thing if you've got no vision with a business, right? The problem there is you don't know where you're going to end up, but you can be super productive in trying to get there. And so
Right.
you got to have both of those things.
It's true. That's the magic recipe.
Yeah.
I always compare my analogy for, having vision without direction, essentially, or traction, is if you drive a manual or have ever driven a manual, it's you got your foot like pedal to the metal, but you're not in gear. You're
Yeah.
getting ton of RPMs, but you're not going anywhere.
Right.
And so
Ah,
you have to
yeah.
have both.
Yeah. You got to have it. You really do have to have both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is good encouragement. I think a good way to tie up the episode for entrepreneurs that just feel like they're trying everything and don't know why it's not working or what to do next. And sometimes you just have to be patient.
Yep. For sure.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you had made the comment earlier, and it was in our notes too, but you said that the common problem is people are chasing symptoms, not the root cause.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, if someone's listening to this, they don't know where to start and working
Yeah.
on their business rather than in it,
Yeah.
then maybe it's go through and write down what's stressing you out, what's keeping you up at night,
Mm-hmm.
what are the problems that you've identified in your business.
Yeah.
And then, if that's the symptom, go back to the root cause. And then
Yeah.
those are the first things to fix.
Always.
And
Yeah.
then don't worry, there'll be three more later on.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly, yeah. You don't try to solve all of them. Just pick three,
Hmm.
right? Start with the first one, solve
Yeah,
that one, and then you've made progress.
perfect. Well, I appreciate it. We've talked through some huge frustrations, right? We have the business runs you, not the other way around,
Yeah.
not enough cash,
Yeah.
people problems hitting the ceiling, nothing is working. Do you
Yeah.
have any final tips for our listeners before we close out?
Yeah. I would say, you know, what you can, the book that we talk about with EOS, the book
Mhm.
Traction, it's got everything that I just talked about in it. Of course, I'm always happy to talk to people. I can teach you in about 90 minutes all sorts of tools. And I can give you that time and teach you all sorts of things that you can use right away to go back into your business to solve these frustrations and ultimately get traction, make your vision a reality. I'm happy to do that.
Perfect. So, how can somebody find you?
Yeah, so you can email me at matt.hansen@eosworldwide.com, or you can visit my site at eosworldwide.com/Matt-Hansen. And that's Hansen.
Ah, good clarification. Thank you. And I will have both of those things linked in the show notes so our listeners can just click through and get there and not have to worry about spelling anything right. I come across the same problem with my name. Well, thank you so much for joining today, Matt. This was definitely an episode that I think people should listen to more than once. And until next time, thank you for listening to The Accelerator. I'm your host, Lera Kooper.